Does success in history always guarantee loyalty? Even if you defeat your enemies, can your friends defeat you? In the 6th century, one man reclaimed the lost territories of the Roman Empire, won impossible wars, and was written into history books as a legend. But his end was not what he expected. Tonight, we'll tell the story of one of history's greatest military geniuses, Belisarius. Before we begin the video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share which city you're watching from. Now, let's dive into the journey of this extraordinary man who shaped the end of one era and the beginning of another. Belisarius was born around 505 AD in the border regions of the Eastern Roman Empire. His exact birthplace is unknown, perhaps in the mountainous regions of Thrace, perhaps in the remote corners of Illyria. Some sources say he came from a peasant family. Others claim he was the son of a minor military family. The only certainty is that he came from an ordinary, humble background and grew up far, very far, from the imperial palaces. There were no golden cradles, marble columns, or silk clothes in his childhood. But this ordinary beginning wouldn't stop him. On the contrary, it gave him something: hunger. A deep hunger for success, for recognition, for greatness. The era Belisarius lived in was a dark, very dark period for the Roman Empire. The massive empire that once dominated 3 known continents, stretching from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Mesopotamia, was no more. That glorious structure had collapsed, and barbarian kingdoms were rising on its rubble. The Western Roman Empire had officially ended in 476 AD. The last emperor, young Romulus Augustulus, was deposed, and the barbarian commander Odoacer declared himself king of Italy. The Visigoths controlled Spain. The Vandals had established a kingdom in North Africa. The Ostrogoths dominated Italy, and the Franks were gaining strength in Gaul. The city of Rome, that magnificent city once the center of the world, was now in barbarian hands, and its ancient forums, triumphal arches and temples were slowly left to decay. Only the Eastern Roman Empire remained, the state that would be known in history as Byzantium. Its capital, Constantinople, founded by Emperor Constantine, strategically paramount, connecting 2 continents. This magnificent city was the last place reminiscent of ancient Roman glory. With its high walls, rich harbors, crowded streets, and glorious churches, Constantinople was still one of the world's greatest cities and had become the center of Christianity. However, the empire had now shrunk and controlled only Anatolia, the Balkans, Syria, and Egypt. The loss of the West was a deep wound, an unforgotten pain for the Romans. Young Belisarius joined the imperial army under these conditions. Exactly how he began his military career is unknown, but it's certain he began to rise rapidly. He was physically impressive, tall, athletic build, with strong arms and broad shoulders. He was charismatic, and soldiers naturally gravitated toward him. But his real power wasn't just physical, it was in his mind. He had the ability to read the battlefield, understand enemy strategy, calculate risk, and make quick, correct decisions at critical moments. He was also humble and would eat in front of his soldiers, stay in the same tents with them, share the same hardships. These qualities made him not just a commander, but a leader. He gained experience fighting against Persian and barbarian raids in the border regions and began attracting attention at a young age. In 527, a major change occurred. When Emperor Justin I died, his nephew Justinian succeeded him. Justinian was young, ambitious, and had a grand, very grand vision. He didn't just want to preserve the current empire. He would reclaim the lost Roman territories, rebuild the old empire, make Rome the center of the world again. This was an enormous project, perhaps crazy, but Justinian was determined. However, for this he needed a commander, a warrior, a strategic genius. And he found Belisarius. Belisarius was only 22, but Justinian had seen his potential and took him in, gave him his trust. The first great test came from an unexpected place, from within. In January 532, the Nika riots erupted in Constantinople. A fan brawl that started in the Hippodrome, the massive arena where chariot races were held, turned into a full civil war within hours. Two rival fan groups, the Greens and Blues, suddenly found a common enemy: Justinian. They were angry about taxes, corruption, and the government. Thousands of angry people poured into the streets, besieged the palace, burned buildings, looted shops, and wanted to depose Justinian. The city was plunged into chaos, and flames painted the sky red. Many structures, including the Hagia Sophia Church, were burned and destroyed. The rioters even declared an alternative emperor, and the situation was out of control. Justinian panicked and seriously considered fleeing. Ships were prepared, treasure was gathered, courtiers were making escape plans. The empire could have ended in one night. But at that critical moment, Empress Theodora stood up. Theodora was no ordinary woman. She was a circus performer, came from prostitution, but was intelligent, strong, and fearless. She told Justinian they shouldn't flee. That dying as emperor was more honorable than living in exile. And they turned to Belisarius. Belisarius marched to the Hippodrome with his unit of several thousand loyal Hun and Heruli mercenaries. The rioters had gathered inside, tens of thousands of people, most unarmed but angry, numerous and determined. Belisarius didn't hesitate and executed his strategy. He had the gates closed and trapped the crowd. Then he gave his command. Arrows rained down, swords swung, spears were thrown. Within hours, between 30 and 40,000 people were killed. The stone floors of the Hippodrome were covered with blood, bodies piled on top of each other. It was brutal, merciless, terrible, but effective. The revolt was suppressed. Justinian kept his throne, and Belisarius was now not just a general. He was the emperor's savior, the empire's protector. This event proved Belisarius's loyalty, but also showed his ruthlessness, that he could make harsh decisions when necessary. After this victory, Justinian gave Belisarius his real great task: destroy the Vandals and reclaim North Africa. The Vandals had captured Carthage a century earlier and controlled one of Rome's richest provinces, its granary. In 455, they had sacked Rome, loaded valuables onto ships, and taken them to Carthage. Defeating them seemed impossible. An overseas expedition meant fighting thousands of kilometers away on enemy territory in an unknown geography. Moreover, overseas expeditions in recent centuries had all ended in disaster. But Belisarius accepted this task and began preparations meticulously. In June 533, Belisarius set out with 15,000 soldiers and 500 ships. The number may seem small, but these were elite units: heavy armored cavalry, master archers, disciplined infantry units. Additionally, Belisarius had introduced an innovation. He gave each cavalryman both bow and sword. This way his cavalry could both shoot arrows from a distance and be strong in close combat. These cataphracts would become Belisarius's deadliest weapon. and provide a great advantage against Vandal cavalry. When the fleet left Constantinople, no one believed in its success. Most people thought this expedition would be a disaster, that the army would be lost at sea or destroyed by the Vandals. But Belisarius boarded the ship with his wife Antonina and set off. Antonina was no ordinary woman. A close friend of Theodora, she was powerful, intelligent, and politically very skilled. Belisarius and Antonina would be a team both on the battlefield and in palace intrigues. And Antonina's connection with Theodora brought Belisarius even closer to the palace. When the fleet reached the North African coast 3 months later, Belisarius put his strategy into action. He moved quickly, surprised the enemy, attacked from unexpected places. The Vandals were caught unprepared because King Gelimer had sent most of his army to Sardinia, and Carthage was almost defenseless. At the Battle of Ad Decimum, Belisarius defeated the numerically superior Vandal army. His strategy was simple but effective. He held strong infantry in the center, used cavalry on the flanks, encircled the enemy, and routed them. When he stood before the gates of Carthage, the city surrendered without resistance. After Belisarius entered the city, he maintained discipline, forbade looting, treated the population respectfully, and this behavior won the people's support. Within months, the Vandal kingdom had passed into history. King Gelimer was captured, treasures were seized, North African territories became part of the Roman Empire again. Belisarius reclaimed a century of lost territories in an incredibly short time, just 6 months, and when he returned to Constantinople in a triumphal procession, the people welcomed him as a hero. A great ceremony was held in the Hippodrome. The captured Vandal king Gelimer was brought in chains and knelt before Justinian. He knelt before Belisarius. The looted treasures were displayed. Soldiers were given rewards. Justinian celebrated his victory, but a suspicion began to sprout within him. Belisarius was too powerful, too popular, too successful. Could he be dangerous? But their work wasn't finished yet. In Justinian's grand vision, the next target was even bigger, even more important, even more symbolic: Italy. The Ostrogoths controlled Italy, and the city of Rome was now a barbarian king's capital. Rome, the city of Caesars, of the Senate, of legions, the cradle of civilization, was now in barbarian hands. This was unacceptable to Justinian and every Roman. The emperor gave the order: reclaim Italy, save Rome. In 535, Belisarius landed in Italy, but this time everything was harder. The Ostrogoths were much more organized, much stronger, much more determined than the Vandals. They vastly outnumbered Belisarius, and Italian geography was ideal for defense: mountains, rivers, fortresses. But Belisarius again delivered a display of genius. He quickly seized Sicily, besieged Naples, broke through a difficult defense. He ordered his soldiers to enter the city through an old aqueduct, and Naples was conquered from within. Then the target became Rome. In December 536, Belisarius captured the city of Rome. The Ostrogoths fled without resistance because armies were coming from the north, and they understood they couldn't defend Rome. Belisarius entered the city that was the heart of ancient Rome as a Roman general in triumph. The people welcomed him as a liberator. This was a symbolic moment. 60 years later, Rome was again in the hands of the Roman Empire. The forums, temples, the Colosseum, all belonged to Rome again. But the joy was short-lived. Ostrogoth King Vitiges gathered a large army and advanced south to retake Rome. In March 537, Rome was under siege. Belisarius was in the city with only 5,000 soldiers, facing a massive Ostrogoth army of 100,000, according to some sources, 150,000 according to others. The numerical difference was incredible, an impossible situation. Everyone expected defeat, but Belisarius didn't panic. He executed his strategy, kept his composure. He had Roman engineers repair the ancient Aurelian walls, strengthened the towers, protected the aqueducts, because the city's water supply was vital. He organized the population. Everyone, including women, kept watch on the walls. He conducted night raids, made sudden attacks on enemy camps, broke morale. The Ostrogoths brought siege towers, pounded the walls, waited for starvation. But Rome held. Belisarius repelled every attack, closed every gap, gave courage to the soldiers. For a full year, Rome remained under siege. Inside, hunger increased, diseases spread, but they didn't surrender. The Ostrogoths became desperate, their resources were exhausted, and finally, in March 538, they lifted the siege and withdrew. Belisarius had created a miracle. With 5,000 soldiers against a 100,000-man army, he had defended Rome for a year. History would record this as Belisarius's most magnificent strategic victory, and military historians still study this siege today, analyzing its tactics. After the siege was lifted, Belisarius received reinforcements from Constantinople and went on the offensive. He pushed back the Ostrogoths with a series of victories in northern Italy. Victories and his army had to retreat north and finally took refuge in their capital, Ravenna. At the end of this 2-year struggle, in 540, Belisarius besieged Ravenna and cornered the Ostrogoth kingdom. Italy was about to be reclaimed. Justinian's dream was coming true. However, at this point, a very interesting event occurred. The Ostrogoths offered Belisarius to become king. They would offer him the crown of Italy, the Western Empire. Belisarius pretended to accept this offer, deceived the Ostrogoths, entered Ravenna, and then captured them all. He had refused the offer. But when Justinian heard this, he became suspicious. Why had Belisarius received such an offer? Was he truly loyal, or was he looking for an opportunity? Belisarius was recalled to Constantinople. Officially, it was a victory ceremony, but in reality it was surveillance. In 541, a new crisis erupted in the east. The Sasanian-Persian Empire, under the powerful Shahanshah Khosrow, went on the offensive, and Syria was under threat. Justinian had no choice but to send Belisarius east. But this time it was different, and Belisarius immediately realized it. He wasn't given enough army, sufficient resources weren't provided, his hands were tied. Justinian wanted to weaken him, break his power. Belisarius did what he could, stopped the Persians but couldn't win a decisive victory. Moreover, in 542, a terrible plague outbreak occurred. The Plague of Justinian, as this epidemic became known, killed millions, and the army melted away. Belisarius was deemed a failure and recalled. In Italy, the situation worsened again, and all gains were endangered. The Ostrogoths rallied around their charismatic new leader Totila and recaptured Rome. Within a few years, most of the territories Belisarius had won were lost again. Justinian, reluctantly or not, had to send Belisarius back to Italy because no one else could stop Totila. But this time, everything had changed. Belisarius was now aging, over 40. His army was weak. He had no resources. He received no support. Between 544 to 549, he fought in Italy, but wasn't like before. He won victories, but couldn't achieve definitive results. He was tired, exhausted, disappointed, worn out physically and spiritually. In 549 he was recalled and never returned to the battlefield. His military career was over. His final years were sad and silent. He lived in the palace, wrestling with his memories. Justinian still didn't trust him, and he was under constant surveillance. In 562, a terrible conspiracy charge was made. It was claimed that Belisarius was planning a rebellion, plotting to kill Justinian. There was no evidence, just gossip, just suspicion, just slander. But it was enough. Belisarius was arrested, his property was confiscated, his honor was dragged through the mud. He was pardoned after a while, but it was too late. His spirit was broken, his heart was shattered. In 565, Belisarius died, quietly, forgotten, alone. Justinian died a year later. The empire began to slowly unravel after them. The territories Belisarius had won were lost again within a few decades. Italy was invaded by the Lombards. North Africa was conquered by the Arabs, all gone. All of Belisarius's victories, all his sacrifices, seemed to have been in vain. In the Middle Ages, a legend emerged that Belisarius was blinded by Justinian, his eyes gouged out, that he lived as a beggar in the streets. This story is probably completely false, has no historical basis, but it was symbolically powerful and captured people's imagination. The greatest general, the most loyal servant, was finally forgotten, betrayed, suffered. But the real story is perhaps more powerful. Belisarius was one of history's greatest military geniuses. With few soldiers, limited resources, under impossible conditions, he won tremendous victories. His strategic intelligence, courage, leadership, and discipline are still taught in military academies today. As one of history's greatest generals, he's mentioned at the same level as Hannibal, Caesar, and Napoleon. And perhaps his most important lesson is this: success doesn't always guarantee loyalty. Power doesn't always bring trust. Greatness is sometimes rewarded with loneliness. But what inscribes one's name in history is the work done, the victories won, the legacy left. Belisarius continued to live after his death, in books, in stories, in legends. And that perhaps was the greatest victory. If you enjoy discovering these kinds of historical stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. I'd be very happy if you share your thoughts in the comments. In our next video, we'll tell the story of another person who left a mark on history. See you soon. Goodbye.